Welcome, everybody. Um, Before we do anything else, and while we're still waiting for people to settle in, I just want to get a quick pulse on where people are at with leave today. So, gonna do a quick little poll. If your company has its leave experience pretty well dialed in, you feel like the process is clear, employees know what to expect, and you feel good about how it's being delivered, drop the word dialed in the chat. If leave is working okay on paper, but you know it could be better, maybe it's still a little bit inconsistent, drop inconsistent. And if leave at your company is honestly still a mess, maybe it's confusing, it's manual, it's stressful for everybody involved, drop mess. And we'll give it like 10, 15 seconds while people roll in. I'm seeing consistent, inconsistent. Okay. Feel like it's 50-50 so far. Inconsistent and a bit of a mess. I feel like that's pretty relatable. And if you're just joining, take a look at the chat that Steven just dropped. If you feel like your leave process is dialed, drop dialed. If it's still, it could be better, put inconsistent. And if it's a mess, put mess. What do you
So
think, Steven? Is
excited.
this lining up with what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I would be curious. I wish I had a fly on the wall perspective. I'm honestly, I thought there would be a bit more messes, but I also get why, maybe that's not something that we're publicly sharing with colleagues. In my experience, like I said in the chat, and I worked in some pretty big companies that were fairly dialed, and it was still a mess. And so, but the inconsistency. Yeah, I think this checks out because in my experience, there's either huge focus and upset, close to obsession, or it's like an afterthought. And I can't wait to jump into what we're gonna talk about today. But so far, no big surprises.
Same here. And okay, well let's get started. We've got an amazing panel today. We have three very different lenses on the same problem. We've got Jessi Johanson, who's the Chief Growth Officer at Tilt. She's been at Tilt since employee number three, I believe. So she's been there. She's an OG. And she's spent years at looking at what actually drives engagement in and around leave events. We've got Theresa Roma, who is the head of insurance solutions at Wellthy. She brings the caregiving lens, and as we'll get into it, that story often starts long before the formal leave paperwork even gets filed. And then we've got Marnie Robbins, who is the co-founder of AltHR Hive. She spent a ton of time living in the gap between what leave policies say and what employees actually experience. And she's going to tell us why so many programs that look good on paper break down in practice. And for those of you who don't know us, I'm Daniel. I'm one half of the Modern People Leader, and got Steven here, who's my co-host.
Hey y'all.
And so now that we've met the panel, we're going to kick off the way that we kick off every episode, every webinar, every live event, and that's with good news stories. So we all share something, either from our personal lives or from the last or from work from the last couple of weeks. And I will go first. So as soon as we hit, end recording on this webinar, I'm going to be hitting the road with my family to go to the beach. So this will be my daughter Lena's first like real beach trip. She went last year, but she was like 2 months old, and so I don't think she didn't really enjoy it. She was just kind of a potato, just like hanging out. But this will be the first year she'll be in the water. She'll be running around on the beach, and I'm really excited. Jesse, you want to go next?
Yes. We live on an acre and a half in Colorado. And my good news is we recently got some ducks, little ducklings, and they survived and they're amazing and they're so fun. And so now we have three ducks that both my kids take care of. They do the chores every morning, every night, and it's been seriously an unexpected joy in our family. I love it so much. Highly recommend.
That's so cute. I just think of I don't know why my mind goes here, but I just think of the Tony Soprano or the Sopranos episode where Tony like falls in love with the duck in his backyard pool.
Yes. Oh, I
And so
forgot about that.
I'm
Yes.
picturing like some version of that.
And
Um,
my son loves ducks. So it was like a big life moment for him. He's 5. So
Oh my
it's
God,
just
so
the best.
cute.
Hmm.
Teresa, you want to keep us going?
Sure, yeah. After 13 years of like just looking at a manuscript and kind of saying one day I'll get to publishing this book. In the last couple of weeks, I published, self-published my NICU memoir from when my twins spent about 100 days in the NICU. So it's really exciting for them to have that story from my perspective and be able to read that.
And what's the book called?
It's called Power Play because they're both hockey players.
Mm.
So it's like it's a really cool because I added a perspective of 13 years later and how they're hockey players and how they started their life kind of in a power play of being shorthanded and kind of continue through that metaphor.
See you. I see you. I like the sports connection and analogies. And I'm so curious what the process is to self-publish, but unfortunately we can't talk about that today,
Yeah,
Teresa. But so curious. Congrats.
thanks.
All right, Marnie, you're up.
All right. So it's really hard to go after Teresa with that. But, and then I'm also thinking chicken duck off of Friends. I'm probably dating myself, but chicken duck, like, can I just have one to have in my house? But for us, just going on a beach vacation too, starting on Saturday, heading to Panama City, Florida, and my daughter is at a different phase in her life cycle. Just had her freshman year of college, so I said, "Do you want to go to the mountains near Jessie, or do you want to go to the beach?" She was like, "Totally the beach." So excited to unplug. It's been too long.
I think that leaves me, right, Daniel?
That's
So
right.
my good news, for the parents out there that have teenagers or like kids in school, summer is always a stressful time, and you know, I feel like everything is streamlined during the school year, and then chaos emerges during the summer. Super stressful to get everything booked, and the final like puzzle in our summer calendar was booking our vacation, which I thought it was a smart move. I bundled with our NPL live event in London, but then I realized like there's like I'm adding complexity to throwing an event, which is already complex, but we were booked. Our tickets are booked. In the process, I also locked down Daniel and I's travel arrangements of I'm our travel coordinator. And so we're booked for London and I'm booked for my family trip. And that feels like a really good thing. We're going to be spending a week in London and then a week in Amsterdam. So super, super excited about NPL Live London and some vacay in Europe. Um, but enough about me. And so what we want to talk about today is something that, Daniel knows well. We're both super passionate about leave, and so for everyone that's joined, and welcome everyone. I've really been looking forward to this conversation for a couple of weeks now, ever since our prep call, and I really think this is going to be a banger. And so, leave is one of those topics that honestly it comes up in so many HR conversations, but it almost never gets talked about the way it deserves, at least the way I think what it should deserve. And still in 2026, we find that leave is often getting treated like a compliance line item still today. And, it's like send it to the benefits team, out of sight, out of mind, let the lawyers review, what they need, let the lawyers do what they need to do. And no one really thinks about it until someone is in a dire need or like there's these really, really high pressured situations. But every people leader I talk to on the topic, has the same story in it. And the story is essentially leave is a defining moment. It's not this afterthought. It's a defining moment in the EX, the employee experience at a company. And, it's one of those key steps in those that are impacted and how they view the employer, how they view the employer's value proposition, how they view the culture or employee experience, whatever you want to call that. And for me, it's like where the rubber meets the road, and it's where employees really find out like the mettle of their employer, and not only the employer but also the HR team, right? I think that's really where you get a real view into, okay, like what are we made of here at this company. And so for me, there's a major gap between what is, there can be major gaps between what's written on paper and what actually happens. And this is where companies are losing trust with their people. And many times they don't even realize that they're degrading the trust, or they're slowly trust is getting kind of chiseled away. And that's what I want to spend the next 40 minutes talking about. We want to pull apart that gap. We want to understand why it's there, what the data actually says, what good design looks like, and where most lead processes are quietly breaking, and what you can do different. And this is, Daniel and I, our views that every attendee of an MPL webinar or live event, we want you to take away something that is practical, something that you can take back to your CHRO, maybe your CEO if you're a smaller company. And so we're definitely going to give you some great nuggets today. And so Jessi, Theresa, Marnie, are y'all ready to do this?
We are.
Go.
Awesome. So, okay, Jessi, I'm gonna put you in the hot seat first. I hope that's okay. And I want to start with your story, not the data, because I think it's going to set up everything that we want to talk about, everything that's going to follow in a really meaningful way. You've talked about how your own leave experience has shaped how you think about all of this. Walk us through that, and then we can nerd out on the data.
Yeah, sounds great. Um, it was exactly like you said. So, what was on paper and how the leave policy was explained to me was vastly different than how I actually experienced it when I went on leave. So, this is when I had my daughter. She's almost 8 now. But I was in sales for many, many years. And as you all probably know, commissioned employees are even harder to support during leave because pay is so complicated. And so that definitely played a factor for sure. But essentially, what happened was I met with my HR when I found out that I was expecting, and she walked me through the policy, which was 8 weeks of disability and then 4 weeks of a company policy. So to me, I was like, okay, I planned on 12 weeks of leave, and like that was kind of that. In practice, what it actually was short term disability. That was 60% of my base pay. So 60% of 50% of my pay. And then a 4 week company policy of 100% of my base. And so you can imagine where I didn't have any warning of this at all leading up to it. And then while I'm on leave, I learn that I'm taking basically a massive pay cut for an entire quarter. And as a salesperson, I'm also taken out of the pipeline.
Mm.
I transferred all of my deals. So, and then also on top of that, I have a new baby and I had an emergency C-section. So I was also like completely just like medically not doing well. It was extremely stressful, and I was taken aback completely. Nobody explained that to me at all. And then it was really interesting the return to work because even though I had expressed this frustration and concern, and now this like family moment that became a financial burden, honestly, at that point, my return to work was also pretty horrendous. And I won't get into details there, but just things said by my manager and
Mm.
expectations that I got on a flight the day I got back from my leave and left my 3-month-old baby at home and had to figure out how to get like breast milk back all by my, it was just like a lot of stuff. And I will say, obviously, looking back, it was the situation, it was the life experience that now led me to where I am. So, you know, in a way, I'm glad that I kind of went through that experience because I really relate to the people that are on the other end of the side when tilt when we're supporting leave, and I take it very personally what we do at work. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's that scenario where I think your policy has the best of intentions, but when you put it in practice, there are a ton of gaps in reality.
Wow. And so I mentioned data earlier. So obviously, given what you do and where you work, you're privy to a lot of data. A lot of you work with hundreds of organizations. So tell me a little bit about what the data says. And like, was that a one off, or I think I know the answer to this, but was that a one off, or what does the data say in terms of like the state of the union on where companies are with lead?
Yeah, I'll tell you from personal experience and then what the data says. The thing that I noticed at the organization that I was at, which by the way, I worked at for 4 years and I loved my job prior to this. And I quit shortly after I returned from leave. And I realized that every woman left after she returned from leave. It was
What?
100%. And I didn't even notice that until I experienced it. And so I really think that it's important for organizations to have that data to inform how they are applying their policies. Because I imagine if they would have had that in numbers and realized, like, wow, we have 100% of the women who take leave in this company leaving the organization when they get back, that's something to fix, right? The other thing that we do know at Tilt is if you handle your leave with care, if the employees have a positive leave experience, even if the leave reason is not a positive reason, but the way you support them in those moments is a positive experience for them, their ENPS score or their engagement with the employer is significantly different when they return from leave and they're way more likely to stay. It's a difference of 70% ENPS compared to like 30 or less. So, really direct impact on your retention.
Big gap. That's a really, really big gap
Yeah.
between 30% EMPS and 70. And so I'm going to keep it rolling. And so, Theresa, one thing I'd add to what Jessi laid out is that I think that this trust building or this kind of violation of trust, depending on how the particular case works out, like I feel like that doesn't happen at the point at which someone is filing paperwork or submitting the ticket to HR. It starts way earlier, in my experience. And so, what's actually happening in the months before formal leave ever gets submitted, at least kind of in the best practice scenario?
Yeah, that's exactly the part of the story that really tends to get missed is that when you're reaching out after a formal claim or a leave's been submitted, while helpful, it's really a delayed impact. By the time someone's submitting an actual formal leave request, that decision's already been in motion for a long time, sometimes months, sometimes even years. And what we're really seeing is a long runway of invisible caregiving and life stress before anything becomes official. It starts really quietly too. Someone's usually coordinating care for an aging parent, or they're trying to patch together home care hours, figuring out what this new diagnosis is going to mean to their child's school day. They might be supporting a partner through a health crisis, and they're trying to stay present at work. But none of that's showing up in the leave system. They're really just trying to experience how to get through a workday at that point. And during that period, people are constantly running this like internal calculation of like, can I keep doing both of these things? And what's going to break first if I do try? And what support can my employer actually provide me at this point? That's the trust evaluation is really, it's happening long before HR even hears about it. So by the time the formal leave request comes through, that decision's often just the outcome of they've already tried everything emotionally, logistically, financially. They've given it so much thought already without any support really coming in yet. And that's where a lot of employers just unintentionally miss the signal because if you're caregiving or you need that support infrastructure to activate really before that point of leave and show up and don't show up like really at the end of their story. Opportunities really earlier when people are trying to stay at work and still trying to make it work, but they're just so much stress that they're under.
I'm just curious, anyone on the panel, anything to add to that? Any Marnie, I saw you in the chat. Any stories or points of view to add to this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that really resonated, Teresa. And yeah, I accidentally put in the host and panelist chat, but just agreeing with you that there's so much ancillary to the actual leave of absence moment. And, having been a caregiver for ailing parents, there are moments where you're leaving for one-off appointments. You don't know, is this a leave moment? Is this a just a one-time moment? And picking up, I love what you said about picking up signals, right? Sometimes you see these signals from your employees that there's something off. They're struggling to keep up with their day to day. So how are we supporting them rolling up to making that leave decision and also rolling off and daring? And so I think that's just a lens that I'm not sure a lot of organizations look at from an organizational employee design standpoint.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stick with Teresa, and I'm gonna shift a little bit into the topic of caregiving and leave, and whether these are two constructs that should be, I guess, looked at or worked on together or separate. In my experience, Teresa, a lot of what gets categorized as a leave event is actually, um, is there's actually more than just leave involved. We talked about this story of everything that leads up to the actual event itself. And so what are your thoughts? I think a lot of companies would view the caregiving and leave as like, or at least approach those in different conversations. Like, I think there's an argument, at least from our prep call, is why you may want to design for these two to be solved together.
Yeah, it's really hard to think of a leave of absence where it's not involving some form of caregiving. Disability or going out because you have an injury or an illness, that's self-care, and usually you have people in your family or friend network that's caring for you. There's the parental leave where you're caring for a new baby. Paid family leave, you're caring for a loved one. So almost every time you're going out on a leave of absence, there's going to be a caregiving component. And I think the key shift is realizing that leave isn't a standalone event. It's really that moment that there's a much longer caregiving story that's starting to become visible to the employer. So when companies treat caregiving and leave as separate programs, they end up responding too late in the journey. Leave becomes that moment of intervention when in reality it's often close to the finale. And what changes is when you design them together, it's really important. First, the employees aren't carrying that pre-leave burden alone. They have support earlier, which can actually reduce stress and sometimes even delay or prevent the leave altogether. Not because people are being pushed to work through it, but because they're getting help navigating what's going on. They're getting access to the support that they need. And second, when the leave does happen, the experience isn't, it's more stable when you have the support surrounding you. People aren't going to go into leave already depleted. They're going to have things somewhat more figured out and have a plan while they're away from work. And then the third, which is really the piece that's often underestimated, and Jessi kind of commented on this perfectly, is the return to work. Return to work becomes dramatically smoother. A lot of breakdown happens here because most of the time, just because your leave is up doesn't mean your caregiving responsibilities are up. So you're coming back and everything you're doing is still ongoing, and you need to reintegrate. And you need to have the support, the background, and knowledge of what you have available to you to make that integration possible. Or otherwise, you are losing people. People don't come back. They just use out their leave to get the payment and then they drop. So when caregiving and leave are designed as this connected system, you don't improve that single moment in time. You're actually creating this continuity through the entire experience. And then that leads to a lot more stronger engagement and long-term retention.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, like, why don't you think we see more of this? Or why do some continue to treat these as separate things to be solved, or separate problems to be solved?
I don't think employers realize that there's resources out there that's not like extremely costly. They think like, oh, I have to pay for their daycare. I have to pay for like someone to go watch their parent, and that's not what they need. While financial support is always helpful, but there's so many benefits out there just to help people understand the process because no one's given a roadmap when they find out that mom fell and needs help. This is all new to everybody. So having that ability to connect and have someone walk you through that process and be there for you, I don't think it's something that a lot of people realize is there. But as we are an aging society and more employees are needing to support their family and loved ones, it's starting to get out there, and you're starting to hear a lot more of those connections starting to take place within the HR conversations when leave does come up.
God, and this resonates with me big time. I have been caregiving for a my elderly aunt. She's 94. She's a retired nun, so she's lived a life of service and like zero possessions, and not with a lack of understanding of how the non-secular world operates. And I just looked at an email, and it was like November 2024 is like essentially how long I've been doing this. And I've had to rebuild her expense, like reset up all of her expenses for her for auto payment, because she was like not making payments on time, and then the lights were going out. And it's like all of this never ending stream of things that even if one of those questions I could have had support or had someone like point me to. And Daniel and I are a two-person bootstrap company, so we don't have that. But I think that I can attest, like if I had just even like someone to hear like some of the challenges, and Daniel does listen to me, don't get me wrong, but it's different. And so I'm off script now, so I will get us back on track. But I have to imagine there are a lot of people out there that kind of relate to that. And so Marnie, I'm going to pick on you next. And so far we've I want to come back to why most lead programs fail in practice. And I think we've been talking a lot about the mechanics of lead, but we started with like a sentiment question essentially. How do you, those of you on this webinar, how do you feel about your lead programs? I think a lot of HR leaders we talk to feel that there's just a lot left to be desired, and oftentimes HR leaders were not able to get the full programs that we want to see in place. So we do the best that we can. And so when things do fail, what goes wrong? I think a lot of companies are technically compliant because that seems to be the focus. Policies exist, forms exist, vendors are in place. Um, but yet there's a confusing experience. There's a lot of emotions run heavy, and I don't think that's what we're designing. That's not the designed outcome that we're looking for. And so in your experience, like, where does this all start to fall apart?
Yeah, well, I think you teed it up well in that it's really about the disjointed nature of the compliance versus the policy versus the DNA of the organization and the people who are in it. And I think that that really is at the crux of a lot of mismanaged leave experience policies and processes. So for instance, employees may going into a leave request process with their manager, they could go in with two different lenses. Number one is a lens of maybe they are scared. They're rehearsing. A lot of managers don't know that an employee will actually spend some time rehearsing their leave request and already preemptively being concerned about being disappointing from a performance standpoint or a burden. And then there's the other side of an employee, maybe in a very culturally synergistic organization, that thinks great, this company is going to take care of me because they have values and behaviors that they say we're going to be people first, right? And we care for our people. And they have amazing onboarding experiences, they have amazing performance experiences, all of these experiences that seem to be in tandem with the culture that they strive to have. And all of a sudden they go into this experience or this leave request conversation with their manager, and then it goes boom, legalese, looking through documents, complexity, and that compliance aspect, and it becomes a defensive posture on the company's part versus the employees stance. So that's the one thing that really I think makes or breaks the leave experience for organizations is employees aren't going to remember the policy. They're not going to remember the number of weeks, but they are going to remember how they felt when they were at their most vulnerable in front of their manager and their leader and in front of their HR representative when they say, "Hey, I need to take this leave." So the policy drives the system and the consistency. So we want to really make sure that we're designing a policy and experience that goes beyond the compliance, but how do we really want to support our people? And it doesn't necessarily have to be in paid leave if we can't afford it, but how are we humanely supporting our people to the best of our ability? But then we also go beyond that, and how do we treat them, how do we support our managers to have those conversations where we don't feel like we're having poor performance because we have to take leave or have to care for people. And a forward lens too that I keep thinking about is increasingly we are going to have employees who are interacting with systems and AI as opposed to humans. We're in a distributed workforce. We have more remote work, we have more AI bots, agents that are going to be our coworkers. And so, what are those leave signals that they're getting, right? Is it just going to be that bot response? Where does the human step into that design? And so, we take kind of the human centric employee design phase. Where do humans step in? Who steps in? Preparing, getting the system right so that we can have those really human conversations. And then we also forward looking have to look at our systems implementation, AI implementation, and design for that as well.
So I'm about to drop a on the fly question to the group. This session is called the hidden ROI of leave, and we're a little ahead on time, and so I'm just gonna take a second to kind of riff. If y'all could let me know in the chat, like what is the state of investment in leave programs at your organizations for those that are comfortable sharing, just like rough and tough. We don't need to know any details. And so, you know, Marnie, I'm going to pick on you just because it happened that, I noticed that we're ahead on time.
Yeah.
And so, the session's called the hidden ROI of leave. And so, I think with what you just shared, there's still a lot of things, that are broken, for the lack of a better word, that might seem a little harsh, or just not like working fully optimized the way we want. And so I've got to imagine that there's a lot of scrutiny on these programs. Well, there's a lot of scrutiny on any costs at a business right now. We're kind of in unprecedented times. And so how do you look at the ROI? Like, what is that? What is that calculation? And or at least the positioning of the ROI in the calc. So if we're saying, there is hidden ROI, you're not factoring in, the impact to EMPS. You're not factoring in the negative impact to trust at the company, the factor of trust. And that obviously has a knock-on effect on retention and all these other things. And so how could we be looking at the ROI calculation for leave a little differently? I'm just curious. And again, we're riffing here. So if Marty, if you don't have a perfect answer, that's okay. But I just thought I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of dig in a little.
No, I love this question and happy to riff on it. Yeah, I work with a lot of organizations who are just standing up these processes, and so they're new to these areas. So when talking about ROI, and I'm sure Jessi and Theresa have some great, really good data in regard to that. But when talking about ROI, it is ENPS, of course, and engagement and whatnot. But I mean, really simple is turnover, right? How much does it cost? You can easily calculate a turnover rate based on one individual. And, I think there's some good data out there. I think I read in general for all leaves, maybe it's like 18 to 34% of individuals leave within a year to 18 months. Don't quote me on that, a year to 18 months after they've taken leave. Well, that turnover cost pays for your paid leave of absence or for your support of that leave of absence. And then we also want to talk about velocity to impact. So when you have someone who went through an experience similar to Jessi, velocity to impact, she was there. But I can imagine if she was there and taken care of and brought in and brought back in a human centric way, there's going to be more engagement, higher performance, and you're going to have higher impact right off the bat, and more commissions, more sales, more closed ones. So for me,
Yes,
it's
that's what I'm
about,
talking about.
yeah,
Yeah, that's what
right.
I
Yeah.
want. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's direct revenue based. And so if you can get your revenue leaders back and in action faster just by supporting them a little extra, it's worth every penny.
Ooh, yes. Thank you, Marnie. Daniel, go ahead.
Well, we actually had a question from Michelle that I think is hitting on the same thing. She asked, besides the employee survey, ad hoc positive slash appreciative comments and high rating when employees come back from leave, what are other data points we should focus on and bring forth to help newer senior leaders understand when financials and misuse of leave is the new concern?
Don't all jump in at once.
I'll add
Yeah.
a few
Jessi.
things. Yeah, I'll add a few things to that Marnie didn't mention. So definitely like plus one to tracking retention, knowing what your turnover cost is when employee returns from leave. Some other things I've seen. So I have seen situations where there is a very high volume of leave requests, especially intermittent FMLA, medical, um, that really is they're using it as a replacement because there isn't a good PTO policy.
Mm.
And I bring this up because I see it quite a bit where it's like there's a tendency to focus on the leave policies, which I think obviously great. We should analyze those and make sure that they're, meeting the expectations of what your policy is written to achieve. And I would say also look at your just time off policies in general. Um, there's an example that we have. One of our customers has a call center, and their PTO policy was hard to understand and also not a lot. And so they had a high, and I'm talking like 30% volume of people requesting FMLA. And that requires admin work. It requires a lot of compliance adherence. It requires employees to be out of the office to go get forms completed by their provider. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. And so we did some analysis for them and said, hey, honestly, if you gave them a little bit more PTO, you probably would save money because they like now you have this whole administrative burden. And so we helped them kind of craft that new PTO policy, which is a little bit outside of our wheelhouse, but also then impacted that high leave rate. So the other thing I would bring up is look by manager, look at volume of leave requests, look by department, role, because all of those things will give you insights into what's happening in the business and where you might need to hone in a little bit.
I love that. In today's day and age, I think it's so easy to be hasty. Um, the velocity at which technological change is happening, I feel is having a knock-on impact on the expectations on business process change and just like how the business is operating. And clearly, the employee experience is a key part of those processes. And I think it could be very easy to look at the behavior of leave is being misused. Like we have a problem with leave being misused, and so the answer to that, you know, we want to change that behavior, and so the hasty answer is cut these programs or do
Totally.
some weird, ninja shit. Excuse my language, y'all.
Yeah.
That is going to then totally undermine the credibility that we have when my wife has a master's in IO psychology, and we have a 5 month old, and so behavior is front of mind, and she keeps repeating to me like, if we're looking for the behavior to change, then what we need to do, it's our job, is to be thorough in understanding all of the factors that might kind of impact that behavior. And a bad PTO policy, I think is a great thing to look at, or just like it's a great reminder to like zoom out and like, okay,
Yeah.
there are other things that could be having a knock-on impact here. And maybe, we can even put together a focus group. Our business partner, Jessica Zvon, is a big believer in like, y'all, we don't have to survey everyone to death. Like data can be accumulated in a variety of different ways, like talking to each other. And so like put together a quick focus group and understand like why, what happened in that moment when you took this, when you had to use it, you felt like you had to use these leave benefits the way you did. So sorry for going on a bit of a rant there, but that's just like perfect response. And so I'm going to get back to the back to what we were intending to talk about, because we have a few things to talk about before we open it up for Q&A. And so, Jessi, I think the final thing that we wanted to cover is on the operational efficiency front. And one of the things that you mentioned in our prep call is that again, this leave is a core part of the EX, and it's not just like a back office concern. And so, when systems are fragmented or manual, what does it actually feel like to what is the knock-on impact to the employee? So for those that are in the middle of a leave event, and there's this fragmented, broken process, what what is causing, what is kind of the impact on the employee? Was what I was struggling to say. So, talk us through kind of the psyche and the mindset of what's going on and what some of the knock-on impacts are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also touch a little bit on the impact on HR. Okay, a couple of things. One, early on when I started at Tilt, I was talking to one of our customers who's still a customer. She's lovely. And she told me, Jessi, leave is 10% of my job, but 90% of my worry. And that just has always resonated with me. And I think it's because of this exact thing that you're talking about. It's all of the things that go into a leave and making sure that you're handling it properly. There's not a single person who's ever gotten into HR who doesn't care about people. That's like just inherently, that is why you get into the business, right? And so, two things on this. One, especially someone mentioned AI. There's so much we can do with AI. Absolutely. And even at Tilt, we are innovating and we are working with AI to improve our product and our processes and make things more efficient for ourselves and our customers. But we truly fundamentally believe that the leave journey needs to include a human experience and human touch points along the way. So our philosophy is Tilt, and by the way, you don't need to buy Tilt, but any leave vendor that you are using to manage leave should reduce the administrative burden. But we fundamentally believe that it shouldn't remove you, HR, from the employee experience. And there are key human touch points along the way that we support you so that you can still have those key human touch points, because that's what's going to support the employee while you have the ROI of us removing compliance risk, administrative burden, operational efficiency, and some of those like employee interfacing experiences where we're helping them navigate forms and things like that. But fundamentally, like, we don't want to remove any of you from that experience. We just want to support you so that you can do it more efficiently and more effectively for your employees. And then to answer the original question, because you asked how does that impact the employee experience, the easier it is for the employee to do the things they need to get done, the better it will be. And then the more they have feel supported by their HR team and by a third party, if you are using a third party, that right there is like the perfect formula for them to be able to focus on what matters, their leave, and know that they're getting the things done that they need to get done along the way.
Ed, anything to add to the other panelists? Feel free to chime in if you have anything to share here.
I think this is why, big fan of Tilt, just going to say that. But, the support versus dictation of the compliance and the policy and the procedure. And a lot of times human resources is put in the position of having to work in spite of instead of along with their leave policy or procedure. I've had back in the day working with an organization that would not put forth assistance with leave and meeting someone in the hospital because he had a heart attack to make sure that he had the right paperwork because I knew executive leadership was not going to let him get away without doing that paperwork. So for HR folk, I do think it really is. We have an opportunity now to work with systems that are really going to support us and keep us from having to go to emergency rooms and hospitals with paperwork just to appease, our compliance or policies.
All right. Well, I think we're at that point, Daniel. Y'all. Thank you for letting me riff with you and meander and take us off script and dig into some things that seemed I had the opportunity to go deep on. It's time for questions, Q&A. Daniel, over to you.
So I think we're still waiting on some questions. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. But I had a question for the group. So what's like the single biggest mistake that you see companies make in the first 48 hours of a leave request? And Teresa, I'm gonna pick on you since I saw you drop something in the chat and it's been a while.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just not providing clear guidance and expectations. I think Jessi's story, it was not abnormal to the typical person. So you submit it, and then you're kind of sitting there waiting, now what? And you don't know if everything's gone through. You don't know how things are working concurrently with other leaves. So having someone that can sit there and really guide you through it right away often gets ignored in the first 48 hours, and you're just sitting there hoping that everything went through properly.
I would also add, I say this a lot to our customers, your managers are your biggest asset, but they are your biggest risk when it comes to leave. And so we believe that educating managers so that they know what to say and what not to say when a leave scenario or situation or request or something comes to them is critical because, and somebody put it in the chat, like your manager might be like, oh, yeah, you can take a leave, not knowing they're eligible, not knowing what the process needs to be, or the opposite. They might deny it when somebody is eligible. That's even worse. I mean, that is, you're talking like lawsuits and things like that. So, like, educating your managers is huge, making sure that they're supported by the business so that they know how to react when an employee comes to them and there's a leave situation happening.
Don't get me started on managers. This is like, I went on a rant for a couple of years just about how it's never been more difficult to be a manager. And like, the fact that knowing the stress that is already being put on managers, how stretched thin they are, and knowing that this is like, the single point of like make or break point, like there's so much can go right in that initial conversation with a manager, but so much can go wrong. And I just can't help but feel a huge sense of empathy for every single manager out there.
To add
Yeah,
to that, Stephen, is just allowing our managers to say, I don't know, but we're going to figure this out together. Because chances are someone does have the information. So don't panic. Give them the space to be human. Don't panic. You may not know all the answers, but guess what? We're going to give you the systems that are going to help you get the answer, and you can walk alongside your employee, not in front of them or panicking around them.
and on
I have
that,
a, oh, sorry, Daniel.
I was
I
gonna
was
say like
just gonna,
on the education piece, like how can how are you training, managers to handle these conversations without it feeling like a script or it feeling too robotic? Because to Steven's point, managers are doing more than ever, more direct reports. They're now being asked to do more IC work. They're being asked to figure out AI for their teams. And then on top of that, a leave conversation pops up, and I could see, like you said, Marnie, that the panic maybe set in if they don't know how to handle it. And so, what advice would you give to the people leaders, here today on how they can best train their managers to handle these convos?
We train for empathy and consistency over any type of scripting, really. Employees don't need perfectly polished language. They just need what's predictable and reliable. Things like, here's what happens next, or here's who supports you, or you're not expected to figure this out alone. And that clarity builds trust without really sounding scripted. And we focus a lot on giving managers permission to just not solve everything, kind of like where Marnie was going with that. A lot of manager anxiety really comes from feeling like they need to fix the situation. But in reality, the most powerful thing they can do is just create the safety net and connect them to the right places and just keep the door open. So instead of scripting, we're really building a framework. Stay human, stay consistent, and just know where your role ends and a system is going to take over.
I want to go back to a comment that I saw earlier. There wasn't a question, but I'm gonna turn it into a question, and this is from Michelle at Best Buy. Um, she posted a comment earlier. Too many pay sources make the complexity of leave pay when several sources depending on where the EE lives. It may degrade the generous LOA pay program brand the companies provide. Too many pay sources makes the EE feel concerned and hope they get paid right by the right pay source. And I think we started with Jesse's, your example was like my pay got turned upside down. And so there's that, and then there is the pay mechanics, like how we're actually paying people, and that being super confusing. And if I remember correctly, there can be lags as well, because it's like, oh, the ticket needs to be submitted, and then it has to be reviewed, and then the manager needs to approve, and then HR has to cross check. And so how are the best organizations like streamlining this today, so that like at least we're getting the blocking and tackling right, and we're kind of setting ourselves up for more success? And this is open to anyone in the panel.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is such a big, hairy topic. We could have a whole webinar on this part, but um, I mean, most organizations that aren't using some sort of tool or system to do this are literally doing it on spreadsheets as best they can. I've seen crazy versions of spreadsheets to try and get this right, to be able to, number one, pay your employees, but then number two, explain it to them. I also have seen a lot of policies where organizations are paying 100% and then clawing back once employees receive third party benefits, because then they know how much they actually should have paid the employee, which also is really hard to do and also risky, because what if the employee doesn't return or all kinds of things? Or they pay $0 and wait until the employee gets paid, and then they know how much they need to pay. So the employee has to go without pay for a while. So this is exactly what we solved with Tilt. And again, not making this a sales pitch, but like, this is so complicated. And employees essentially have two questions when they are taking a leave: how long can I be on leave, and how much am I getting paid? And those are the two things that really need to go right, in order to, make sure that the employee experience is optimal. Um, So we do actually show the employee the estimate of their pay and the breakdown of the sources while they're on leave before they even take their leave. And then we help the payroll team and the HR team pay the employee what the employer owes for the pay or for the leave. Um, I honestly like it. It's spreadsheets. Yep, spreadsheet warriors. I've seen them. I hats off to all of you because it is like a monumental task.
Fighting the good fight.
Yes.
Sorry, Daniel. Over to you. I hijacked the Q&A there.
No, you're good. I think it's time for one word close. So we
Okay.
end every episode with one word or phrase close. And so, whatever is coming to mind for you as we wrap up this conversation, and we like for our guests to go first. So, Marnie, how about you kick us off?
Beyond, because leave experience goes beyond leave. I think that was my biggest light bulb moment.
Teresa?
Continuity,
Ooh, I
just
like that.
being able to support throughout the whole waves of the leave.
Jessi?
Inspired.
What
I'm
do you
gonna
got,
go
Steven?
with yeah. I'm gonna go with a few words. Ditch the spreadsheet. I know
It's
it's
a good
hard as
one.
it is, yeah. But to be fair, I haven't done an analysis on like all the platform alternatives, but I've got to feel with AI and all the things that there's got to be a better solution for us than spreadsheets. So ditch the sheets.
And I'm gonna say be human. I feel like that was, the overarching theme of today's conversation. It's pretty simple. So that's a wrap. Huge thanks
Yes.
to Jessi, Teresa, and Marnie for being so generous with what they're seeing at their companies. Like Steven said, leave is one of those topics that doesn't get the space that it deserves, and it's not talked about enough. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation today. And so, big shout out to all of you and to the Tilt team for partnering with us on this one. If you liked today and you enjoyed the webinar, attend our future ones. You can also subscribe to the podcast, go listen to the Modern People Leader, and go check out Tilt, Wellthy, and AltHR Hive. So we will send the recording probably tomorrow morning and a recap. But if you have any other questions for us in the meantime, feel free to reach out. We're here. So thanks for spending an hour with us and see you on the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.